Hi everyone, I am Miranda Miller, and when it comes to a queer museum, I think that we should make space for a couple different things. And that is the novel Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and it was published in 1938, and also its film adaptation, which was directed by Alfred Hitchcock, and it was made in 1940. In case you're not familiar with the story, Rebecca is about an unnamed narrator. In the film, she's played by Joan Fontaine, and she's never given a name in the book or the movie. She's a young woman who meets and falls in love with a handsome widower named Maxim de Winter. They get married, and he takes her to his ancestral home of Manderley, which is outside of London. And there she's essentially haunted by the ghost of her predecessor, who is Maxim's first wife, Rebecca, and that's who the novel and the film are named for, although we do never get to meet her in the film. She's also haunted by a very disturbing figure in the form of Mrs. Danvers, who looks like this. And she is also shown like this in the film, a very sort of creepy, looming figure throughout the entire piece. Mrs. Danvers was Rebecca's lady's maid, and as the novel and the film make very apparent, she's someone who was probably obsessed with Rebecca and maybe even in love with her. So there's a couple different reasons why I think we should include Rebecca in the Queer Museum. And they are, one, that Rebecca led a very radical lifestyle for the time, and the novel and film make that very clear. And they suggest that a queer story might have existed between Mrs. Danvers and Rebecca as well, and that's why I believe that we should make room in the Queer Museum for them. So I do want to read some passages from the novel to you that reveal its queer tendencies, and first we'll talk about Rebecca's less than conventional lifestyle. While she was married to her husband, Rebecca had many affairs, and the novel makes it clear that it was probably affairs with men and women, and Rebecca herself is said to have stated, quote, "I shall live as I please, and the whole world won't stop me," end quote. Rebecca's widower Maxim, whom we later find out actually killed his adulterous wife, offers readers many clues about Rebecca's unconventional lifestyle. So one thing he states is, "I hated her. I tell you, our marriage was a farce from the very first. She was vicious, damnable, rotten through and through. We never loved each other, never had one moment of happiness together. Rebecca was incapable of love, of tenderness, of decency. She was not even normal." This passage has a very telling element in that Maxim refers to his dead first wife as not even normal, and I believe that that phrase is probably a direct reference to the lesbian affairs Rebecca was rumored to have had in the novel and the film. The use of the phrase not even normal also falls directly in line with the study that we've done in this class of how loaded the word normal is, and how it's basically used as a weapon to separate heterosexuals from gay individuals. Maxim also later says that his first wife, "She told me about herself, told me things I shall never repeat to a living soul. And she would be up at dawn, driving to London, streaking to that flat of hers by the river like an animal to its hole in the ditch, coming back here at the end of the week after 5 unspeakable days." The phrases that pique my interest here are "told me things I shall never repeat" and "unspeakable days." To me, the lack of any specific mention of Rebecca's queer tendencies was done in order for the novel to avoid being censored, and so it could also avoid having any obscenity claims leveled against it, which was very common in the early 20th century. Maxim, I think, intentionally uses this non-specific language, like "things I shall never repeat" and "unspeakable," but discerning readers can sort of piece apart what he says and surmise that Rebecca was engaged in a less than conventional sexual lifestyle. This particular passage from the book also reminds me of a very famous poem called Two Loves by Lord Alfred Douglas, and in that he uses the rather infamous phrase, "the love that dare not speak his name." Douglas claimed that he used that phrase in his poem to talk about the platonic affection that a younger man could have for an older man, but many believed that the love that dare not speak his name is actually a reference to sexual love between two men, and more specifically, the love that Douglas had for his older lover, who was Oscar Wilde, a famous writer. In fact, that poem by Douglas was used as evidence against Wilde in his gross obscenity trial. And since that time, the phrase "the love that dare not speak his name" has often been used to describe gay relationships, and in Rebecca, we see many references to things that the characters cannot directly speak of. And I believe they are making these rather obfuscated references to homosexuality, but they feel they can't directly address it with words. Later on, Maxim tells the narrator that he and Rebecca never truly lived as husband and wife, and Mrs. Danvers states, "She was not in love with Mr. De Winter. She was not in love with anyone. She despised all men. She was above all that. I think both of those passages indicate queer possibilities to readers and film viewers. We also see queer themes emerge in the way that Mrs. Danvers' character is described by the narrator. The narrator has a consistently and constant uneasy feeling around Mrs. Danvers, but as with The Love That Dare Not Speak Its Name, it's a feeling that she can't fully articulate with her words. So readers are given the following descriptions of how the narrator feels around Mrs. Danvers, and these are quotes from the book. Something in the expression of her face gave me a feeling of unrest. I met her eyes, dark and somber, and that white face of hers, instilling into me, I knew not why, a strange feeling of disquiet, of foreboding, and I did not want to go alone with Mrs. Danvers. The idea of the love that dare not speak its name, is also used in reference to Mrs. Danvers, who tells the narrator that she came to Manderley when the first Mrs. De Winter was a bride, so Rebecca, in other words. Their narrator then notices a very significant change in the character of Mrs. Danvers after she refers to Rebecca being a bride, and the narrator says, her voice, which had hitherto, as I said, been dull and toneless, was harsh now with unexpected animation, with life and meaning. The change was so sudden that I was shocked and a little scared. I did not know what to do or what to say. It was as though she had spoken words that were forbidden, words that she had hidden within herself for a long time. I find the phrases spoken words that were forbidden and words that she had hidden within herself to be of particular interest, and perhaps even a reference to the idea of being unable to fully articulate in language what was likely a love between two different women. The final queer element of the novel that I want to address is the rather infamous bedroom scene where Mrs. Danvers gives the narrator a tour of the late Rebecca's still very immaculately kept bedroom. It's basically a shrine, and I'll also link to a clip of that from the film in my presentation, and hopefully you guys will watch it. It's very brief. During the scene, a lot of intimacy is suggested between Mrs. Danvers and the late Rebecca, and the narrator is very disturbed by this. So Mrs. Danvers opens the bedroom scene by basically luring the narrator further into the bedroom, stating, now you are here, let me show you everything. I know you want to see it all, you've wanted to for a long time, and you were too shy to ask. The narrator responds to this by stating that she hated and feared the low and intimate voice of Mrs. Danvers, and that she found Mrs. Danvers to be, quote, excited in a strange, unhealthy way. Later in the bedroom scene, Mrs. Danvers shows the narrator the late Rebecca's night dresses and her underclothes as well, to which the narrator tells readers, quote, her manner was fawning again, intimate and unpleasant. The smile on her face was a false, unnatural thing. I find the words strange, unhealthy, and unnatural to be of particular interest during this part of the book, and again, I believe these words are direct references to the queer nature of Mrs. Danvers and her relationship with the dead Rebecca. At this point, if you want to pause my video, that would be great, and you could click on the YouTube link to the bedroom scene from Rebecca. I did try to record it, but the volume is super low, so it's better if you go to YouTube directly instead. And then once you watch that, come back and I have a couple more things to say. Okay. Alright, now that you've watched the bedroom scene, this scene to me does a very effective job of revealing Mrs. Danvers' obsession with Rebecca, and I think it's shown especially clearly in the way that she maintained a shrine to her, and in what would have been Rebecca's most intimate and private space, which was her bedroom. The scene also shows Mrs. Danvers very lovingly caressing a sheer negligee of Rebecca's, and imploring the narrator to feel it as well, which creates this very clear sense of fright in the narrator, which you see in the film very clearly. It seems the narrator is scared much less by the ghost of Rebecca than she is by the strange Mrs. Danvers. So to sum up my main arguments, I believe Rebecca, both the novel and the film, deserve to be included in the Queer Museum because they discuss a woman's very unconventional lifestyle, and they provide shadowed but apparent references to queer life. And I think the novel and film are also important to include in the museum because they demonstrate that queer stories have always been present, even if they weren't told so blatantly and out in the open as perhaps they are now. So thank you very much, and I do strongly recommend reading the novel and seeing the film if you haven't yet. They are outstanding pieces. Thanks.